Hello, let's start today. And last time we talked about the introduction to philosophy. If you remember correctly, you should still bear on your mind the question of what philosophy is. And so far, and you should think about that. What is philosophy? And I hope you won't conclude philosophy is something like physics or biology or chemistry or geology, something you can do without, and it's another skill or something. It's not. Generally speaking, philosophy is this kind of field which provides you the world view. In other words, everybody you know will have a worldview, right? And you have a methodology, right? And the philosophy's task is to provide you with that. So if you don't have the correct one or the wise one, you probably have your own, right? And you either learn from other people or you learn by yourself. But if you haven't never studied philosophy, yours probably has a lot of problems, but you didn't realize it before you come to the class of philosophy. Okay, so that's my point. All right, okay. Today our topic is the Big Bang of civilization. Well, why I say the Big Bang? We started from the Western philosophy, and because according to Hegel, in his history of philosophy, philosophy of history, he compared uh, child growth in knowledge to a race, a human race, a culture, let's say Christianity or Chinese or Indian people, or and also the entire human race in growing knowledge. In other words, he says the three different groups and three different uh, entity, and either as a person, him or herself, or as a culture, a group of people, or the entire human race, has basically the same process of learning knowledge. That is, the way they learn simple things first. They like stories when they were young, and when they grow up, when they get matured, they want to know laws or the truth of nature, and eventually, when they really matured at the adult age, they really want to know truth before they eventually die. And that's the basic process. So when I say the Big Bang of a civilization, I mean this part, that is entire human race uh, development. I compare this part to the Western civilization from ancient Greek. Well, you may argue that in the East, in the Orient, Hinduism or the Chinese they have also some thinking or myths or different stories, things like that, and that's true. And but today I just want to compare to follow the trace of the ancient Greeks and use it as a representative of civilization, the start of civilization. All right, okay, so let's continue. First, I want to talk about history and the society. The time uh, range is roughly 7,000 before Christmas BC to 800 BC. And that period is in the Greek history is a Neolithic age to Bronze Age, eventually to Homeric age. All right, and you know what a Neolithic age is? You know that? Have you ever heard of it? Okay, in our anthropology, we divided the development of human civilization by using different tools of uh, production or uh, building up their civilization. Let's say people use stones first to make tools, to cut wood, and later on people use bronze. Bronze metal is a kind of metal, you know that, right? Okay. The iron, eventually they have steel, and that's so we different with different period we classify them according to the use of the metal. That's why. Okay. So the Neolithic age is the new Stone Age. All right. Bronze Age, bronze is kind of metal that a lot of used in tools and weapons. You know, the dagger or the sword is made of bronze. And the Homeric age is the age roughly 9th century BC in ancient Greek. Okay, so within this period, there are some things we need to notice. And the first is uh, in terms of people or race, in the ancient Greeks, they have the system of slavery, and they have masters, of course, and there's another in between. It's like artisans, like soldiers, like free individuals. At that time, the Greeks are doing something like this. When they have wars against other race or minorities, or they call it savages, if they win, they will get their prisoners, make them to be slaves, okay, and make the women and the kids all to slavery, and so every household had a few slaves, and the masters or the adults, the really rational people in ancient Greek time, are considered only male adults, not even including women. That's the case. But what is interesting here is the division of either master or free people in the middle layer or the slaves are not fixed. They can change. And if you, let's say, a slave, if he behaves in some way that is pleasing to the master, or he did something wonderful, he may be freed. So he's not a slave anymore. So you have to notice it's not fixed like later period, uh, the black people was enslaved in the last a few hundred years ago. It's not like that. They can change at that time. All right. So the race, in terms of race of the people, they formed the Greek society in each island in a very special way. All right. And in terms of language, there's also they learned a lot of they sort of incorporated many places. Let's say the letters, alphabets, and they basically copied from Phoenicians. That's in the minor Asian part of the region, and so it's a sort of a languages they eventually established as the ancient Greek language of the letters. I think that's eventually settled down at that, and because of their uh, geological very peculiar environment. They have many groups of islands, and each of them have its own political system and different rules, and either from the very strict or dominant uh, military ones to the democratic things, and later on, all these seeds are spread and grow from that period. Okay, and the Homeric age, it's roughly at that time, it's 900 BC, or we have the some a poet. Actually, it's I think he is a blind man, and he gathered all the stories about the ancient myths of the Greek myths and their heroes, and he summarized into two long poems, and one is called Iliad, the other called Odyssey. Have you ever heard of that? Okay, they each of them is like more than 10,000 lines, so it's a it's a very long one, but they have a very important role in the history of world literature. So a lot they set up examples for later generation for literature roles. But what I want to particularly mention is we should think about the Homer's poems like this. The stories, the heroes in those two poems, like Achilles, like Odysseus, like Helen, like the the gods, like Zeus, uh, uh, people like that. We should regard them as a story of human race, or as for the entire Greek people. You know, I at the beginning I mentioned that the comparison Hegel used for individuals, for a group of people, let's say one culture, they have similarities. So from here you can see that the for the entire race of ancient Greek people, they like stories. They educated their youngs all with stories, heroic stories. That's how they educated their uh, young generation. It's like if it's a family, the father or mother will tell daughter or son when they go to bed with a story. See, it's a similar, it's a comparable to that. So you have to notice that. Uh, okay, so that's the first part, the history and the society. Let me say a few things about the Homer's time. Oh, it's called, I think, Golden Times. The long poem, Iliad. Iliad is a story, basically. If you have any heard of it or have some reading on it, you probably basically know what it is. It's about Trojan Wars. Okay, it basically it goes like this. There's a very beautiful girl called Helen, and Helen is well known for her beauty. So there's many islands in the Greek in that region. All kings of each country agreed that if Helen pick one, any king to be her husband, other people will follow. That is, they will agree. There's no fight. They will support it. So Helen picked one king. Uh, I think it's I forgot the name of it, but anyway, it's one of the 5 or 6 kings as the husband. I think it's Hector. The name is Hector, and but the all other kings agreed with Helen's choice. But what is unexpected is one of the sons, a prince called Paris from another tribe, went to visit Helen to this kingdom. I think the king is called Magnan, Agamemnon, something like that. He was attracted by Helen's beauty, and Helen was also attracted by this young man, Paris, his youthfulness. And so Helen decided to run away with Paris. And so out of his own will, Helen went with Paris, go back to Paris city that is called Troy. And the Iliad is the name of Troy, but at that time it's called Iliad. So, but later on we call that city as Troy. And you know what happened afterwards? It's so the king got very mad. Of course, Hector got very mad too. So they gathered uh, several branches of armies from different tribes to attack Troy to try to get Helen back. That's basically the story goes. And they, I think, attacked Troy for 10 years without conquering it. And eventually they decided to use the Trojan horse. You heard of Trojan horse, right? They pretend to be withdrawing, but hide on the back of another island and have soldiers uh, hiding inside the wooden horse. Then the Troy city, the citizens from that don't know that. They pull the horse in. Then at night, after celebration, they got drunk. The soldiers get off the big wooden horse and open the gate. All the other ships that was hidden behind other island then rushed in, eventually got uh, just crashed Troy city. They, I think Hector intended to kill Helen, but look at Helen, she's so beautiful, she just took her back. And there's another hero called Achilles. He is from Spartan, and he is very brave. He killed other people, but he was killed by Paris by an arrow shooting into his heel. Yeah. So that is story of Achilles' heel. You heard of that? You know that? That's his devastating part. He is so brave. He is number one. Nobody can beat it unless you hit his heel. And that the story goes, when he was born, his mother, I think is a goddess, pulled her into the river to make him the baby actually is very strong. But the part the mother hold is the heel, so that part is not deeply into that water. So that's why that part is his very the part of the dangerous, life-threatening defect, uh, defective part. Okay, that's a story. But anyway, eventually the city of Troy was sacked, and Helen was taken back by Hector. And that's basically the story of Iliad. For Odyssey is another one. You know, after the city of Troy was sacked, Odyssey need to come back to return to his previous, his motherland. Odyssey had a wife when he left 10 years ago, was giving a baby. And he was the king of that city. I think it's Ithaca. I think it's called Ithaca. And when he was absent, many suitors came to his wife, asked her, his wife, to pick up a suitor to marry so that they can be kings. They say they persuaded his wife that Odyssey has died and things like that. But eventually, after many different torture and stories, and Odyssey returned to Ithaca, and with the help of his son and his wife, he killed all the suitors and to be king again at that time. That's the story of Odyssey, and basically that's a brief summary, right? Okay, so next is what's a historical role played here, and what's a uh, social influence? Their stories, the literature, the heroic literature influence of philosophy. That's our point. All right. First, I want to say at that time, Greek is no not very different than the Orient, than let's say in the India or the Chinese people. They have their myths, they have their stories too. You see, Greeks have their stories too. So they are basically the same thing, but the difference is at that time there is a major shift. It happened, or we call it a turn, which happened in Greek time, not in India, not in China in the ancient time. That makes big difference. This turn is called Socratic turn. All right, okay, and people actually, philosophers at that time, they are not happy with explanation of the natural phenomena. Let's say, what's wrong with the weather when it have thunder or have a rain or have a hurricane, things like that. There's a big changes. In the past, all the explanation is pushed to the God. They say that's God will and something like that. And eventually, people, especially the philosophers, some people, some smart people, try to explain the natural phenomena from its inner reason rather than God. Okay, be careful with this time. This is very important. That is how philosophy was born. They try people, smart people, some smart people started to explain natural phenomena by its reason and by the from nature itself rather than think that's God's will or something like that. So it's a tremendous change. Because that change, the entire thinking of human civilization take a turn. Okay, so from that on, this group of wise people, they become philosophers. They started to ask questions. And what is the reason? Let's say they started to ask some basic fundamental questions like who am I and where am I or what is the world and how we should conduct ourselves in this world. Questions like that they started to ask them. But mostly at that time, the major, the focus, of their question is still how to explain the nature of the world. Mm, they'll discuss what is made of, what the world is made of. It's because of the many sources or because of one thing, and uh, how many God do we have? It's a monotheism versus a polytheism. That means many gods versus one God. When the philosophers come to this part of asking questions, they started uh, with this question too. If it's one thing which decided everything else, or it's many, many sources, many, many elements which decided our world. So from that one, from God, from religion, we come to this part of a philosophy also have, which also have this question of the either from one source or from many sources. All right. Okay. So I want you to notice there's many schools of philosophy, but uh, most importantly, there's some uh, particularly noticeable, and we should remember, and we should notice how the people or philosophers inherited each other's research or questions and thinking, and how they passed on the study of their own to later generations. And so I want you to remember this part. The major philosophers at that time, and there's a few, and but I want to mention. Normally, we say there's a the first philosopher is called Thales. Thales is we normally attributed him to be the first philosopher. He was from the I think it's from the minor Asian part in today's geology, geometrical place. He, I think it's called that place is called Elni. I think it's he in his youth he went to Egypt to study geometry, to study mathematics, and he returned back to Greek island. And what is particular about him is he believes that water is the basic element of everything. Water, okay? Water is a fundamental element which controls everything, and everything of the world developed from water. That's his thought. And about him, one particular thing, there's a story told about him, and he once used his knowledge about the weather and predicted the the harvest of the olive trees, olive oil, and so he made big money with that. So that's a proof that the philosophers not only can think about abstract things, but they can also can use their knowledge uh, to support themselves, and they are very talented. And I think that he himself made an example of it, and that's we should remember. All right. Another after him, there's several other philosophers. I think that there his Thales relative, like Anaximenes, Anaximanders, uh, they believe the chief element of the world is air. Another one believe it's earth, and but I want to particularly mention is the one philosopher called Pythagoras, and everybody knows Pythagoras because his Pythagoras uh, theorem, right? It's if it's straight angled square, the you know that one, the c square should equals to the b squared plus a squared, right? You know, that's Pythagoras. What? Is that not correct? It's correct, right? That one he discovered. It's said Pythagoras theorem. Okay, that is the one he discovered. He attributed. He thinks his thought is that math is a principle of the world, and I think within his time, somebody discovered the irrational number. You know, irrational number. It cannot be divided by a finite decimal point or something like x, like a pi or natural number e, something like that. All right, but he was so mad, and the story says he got that guy killed. So he doesn't admit that. He thinks that's a problem. So he the story also says that he credited himself by taking ideas from many of his disciples, but he didn't leave any writing to later generations. So we didn't have anything. It's just somebody else wrote about him, so we know about him. All right, but I want you to particularly notice this. Pythagoras is the one who thinks the world is math. Think about that. That's how deep the idea is. The world matter is mathematics. That's idea. Till today, it still affects us today, right? The God particle we discovered by using Collider machine in Europe recently. It's because of mathematical calculation, right? Somebody predicted it like 50 years ago, many years, 30 years ago, maybe, and it's eventually proved. The Collider machine proved its existence, right? Somebody got Nobel Prize about it. All right, okay. But the idea, remember, is the math is a fundamental nature of the world. It's from Pythagoras, right? Okay, another philosopher I want to mention is called Parmenides, and this one is very important too. I like him too. Parmenides is what different about Parmenides is many other philosophers think the world changes or many other things will change. But Parmenides thinks the world does not change. There's something that is fundamental, and that's his idea. And he also believes that the world exists, and that is, he called it a being. In other words, whatever we think about the world is the same as the world itself. In other words, thoughts are the world. That's his fundamental idea. We learn the world, we learn from our thoughts because the world exists there, it's being. So that's the source of our knowledge. That's Parmenides' idea. And that's a very deep tool that affects many philosophers in history, especially Hegel and the German philosophers, and eventually Heidegger and many things. So ancient Greek philosophers and really sort of set up the bar, the standard to how to explain the world with what they think and things like that. One more philosopher I want to mention is too. It's called Heraclitus. Heraclitus doesn't belong to any other philosophy schools, and his idea is the world is moving all the time. and it's the representation of moving. It's fire. It's like a fire. That's his idea. His famous saying is, "You cannot step into water twice, the same water twice." That's his saying. All right. That that means things moving every second. So there's nothing without changing. And also the dialectic idea of Hegel's is from him too. So he is thinking the moving forward is all his idea from him. Okay, so I want you to notice him too. These are some major philosophers, and you should remember. All right. Okay. The last part is about the movement itself. And after you know the ancient Greek, we call it pre-Socratic philosophers, you should notice particularly they are interested in explanation of natural phenomena or the world itself. What is the matter? What is the material things in the world? What is a fundamental factor or the core, the essence of the world? Another thing I want you to think about is what is the thought and how is what is the relationship of thinking related to the world? All right. Okay. The history of ancient Greeks is a history, as I mentioned before, of how a baby, a child grows up to realize the world. All right. If I want to uh, uh, think about this connected with today, I would say a lot of people, when they grow up, they still remember or like the childish, their stories they learn from their childhood years. All right, that's a sign they are not mature, right? Okay, so if you, let's say, you always like a girl when he grows up, she's still like the Alice in Wonderland all the time. That's a sign of naivety. All right. If it's a boy, he always liked games when he was since he was 5 or 6. He never grown up. Okay. So this is the evidence. You have to know deeper part of the world. You have to think about the mathematics. Think about the ethic questions. Why do we live? What's the best way to live? And what's the meaning of life? You have to think complex questions. That's how your maturity or your intellect, intelligence develops. If you are always indulged in your childhood fancy, like Alice in Wonderland or the games playing all the time, you are never be mature adult. You can never be a man. That so I want you to pay particular attention to this part. It's very very important when you think about that. Of course, maturity or not, the growth process, you cannot push it. If they are not, they are not. So if we think about the other culture of other nations, like let's say in India or in China, they never have this turn from myth, from ancient myth, from literature tradition to science or to logical thinking about logical deduction, the questions the ancient Greeks raised. It's you can say that's probably the Greek way. The people in the philosophers from Greek time probably is typical, are typical of the intelligence development of a human being, and so it's really example that gave you the seed. They spread the seed for later generations for science to be developed in another 2,000 years. But other culture like India or China or Muslim world, Islamic culture, they all missed this part. I think this is so Western culture in terms of Greek tradition is very different from the rest. They find the right way of the best way to develop their intelligence, the human civilization, which affected what we are doing today. And it's still going on. The whole world later on catches up and follow this tradition till today. All right. So think about what I said, and we'll discuss in detail next time about it. And you may also do some reading about it. And if you have questions, we can discuss next time. All right? Okay, thank you very much.